Somewhere along the line, innovation and the tech sector model of Silicon Valley became the gold standard for economic growth and dynamism. That's led to a lot of places trying to replicate it, but few are succeeding as that global hub did. Dan Breznitz teaches at the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, where he is co-director of the Innovation Policy Lab. His new book takes that approach to task. It's called Innovation in Real Places: Strategies for Prosperity in an Unforgiving World. It is a finalist for the Writers' Trust inaugural Balsillie Prize for Public Policy. And it brings Dan Breznitz to our airwaves from the nation's capital. Great to have you back on. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
I want to start, and this is not really meant to be a smart aleck question, but you may have intuited what my first question would be with the way I read your title, Innovation in Real Places. What's a real place as opposed to an unreal place for innovation?
Well, an unreal place is to a certain degree Silicon Valley, or our ideal of Silicon Valley. And a real place is a place where, our real Canadian or people anywhere in the world actually live. Hamilton, Regina, even Toronto, if you can imagine that.
I can imagine it because we had the mayor of Toronto and the mayor of Waterloo in this studio, I guess a couple of years ago, saying that there was a corridor between our two cities where innovation is transpiring. So that's a real place in your view?
It's a real place. I'm not sure whether there is a corridor in which innovation is transpiring. And I'm also much more worried, and that's really why I don't like the Silicon Valley model, whether that innovation that will transpire actually will translate to a lot of good jobs for all Canadians and not just very high profits for the very few, which is what the Silicon Valley model has become.
Right. What is your most significant concern about the fact that Silicon Valley has become the symbol of innovation on this continent?
So first of all, I think it has given us all a wrong idea of what innovation is, and completely confused between invention and innovation. So invention is coming up with a new idea in a lab, wherever, in a garage. Innovation is actually putting ideas into reality, and it comes all across the production chain of products and services. And you can see how important it is even in the vaccines that we have now. It's lovely we have an mRNA vaccine. It's lovely that somebody came with a molecular. It's lovely we even managed to get the first vaccine. If we actually want to be able to live with corona, we have to innovate to the degree that we produce billions of units of that vaccine every 6 months and then distribute them to every human on Earth. And that's really where innovation has the impact. It's when we reach that point. It's not when the few wealthy have a new gadget to play with. And Silicon Valley has become mostly about this new gadget. And the people employing there are mostly the geek elites, and they got fabulous financial, profits. And the rest of America, or in this case, Canada, gets very little.
I'm going to follow up on that because you're also quite critical of what you call people in organizations who make too much money by selling myths about innovation. What are those myths that we need to be aware of?
So the first of all is the myth that Silicon Valley is the only place that does innovation on the world, and that if you want to be an innovation and have economic growth, you need to look like Silicon Valley. As a matter of fact, in order to excel in every part of a production, you need to be innovative. I don't know if you noticed that, because I know that you love to have a new car every 3 to 6 months. And this year, I know that you have to wait multiple months in order to get your new car, because General Motors, for example, cannot get semiconductor chips. And the semiconductor chips, silicon, by the way, are not happening, not because Silicon Valley is not doing its job, but because Silicon Valley forgot how to innovate in the production of silicon. And that should teach us that there are multiple ways in which we can innovate and create local prosperity, and not necessarily follow the ideal of Silicon Valley and the consultant that sell it because it looks so sexy, and instead concentrate on why we, as Canadian, as Hamiltonian, as Torontonian, as Waterlooian, wants to have innovation. And that is in order for our community to be prosperous. And that's why I really do not like the idea of people running around telling us all that if we only do those 5 magical things, have a lot of venture capital, and add an hyphen to our name and call ourselves Silicon Valley of the North, all will be well.
Do you know if anybody in Silicon Valley has read this book, and if so, what they think about it?
A lot of them have actually read that book, and they send me emails, and most of them agree. And most of them agree because you have to remember that Silicon Valley also wasn't that way. It's called Silicon Valley because that's where you had the Silicon Revolution, right? The semiconductor revolution. Mm-hmm. What really happens, and most people do not understand, we had that small thing called globalization. And in globalization, we have started to produce everything in stages. And as you produce everything in stages, you change the ways in which innovation translates to economic growth in places. So Silicon Valley creates huge wealth for the very few in the United States, mostly in Silicon Valley for the geek elites and the financier and for Wall Street. It also creates massive amount of wealth when it's translated to jobs and products, but that's happened elsewhere. For example, in Taiwan, in Korea, and in China. We, as Canadians, have to decide where we want to excel on innovation, what kind of people we want to be employed in this innovation miracle, and how we're going to pay them and employ them and create those skills. And that's a discussion we do not have in Canada. We haven't even started it. And that's what worries me at the moment.
Well, just for fun, let's do a real life example from your life, because you did learn a lesson about innovation when you went bicycle shopping, as you did with your kids. You want to tell that story?
Yep. So if you go to a bicycle shop, I have to admit that I'm old enough to remember that mountain biking was something that, you dreamed about if you're a semi-professional athlete, because they were very bulky, huge, unbelievably expensive, and normal human beings like me and others couldn't even engage with that sport. And then suddenly it all changed. And it all changed because of a Taiwanese company called Giant Manufacturing, which figured out how to do carbon steels production for the frames. Once they did that, by the way, with the help of the Taiwanese government, the same organization that also created the Taiwanese semiconductor miracle, they figure out how to use this much, not just cheaper, but much stronger and lighter material to then start to develop bikes that fit all kinds of people, from children to people like me who are not semi-professional athletes, to females and males alike, taking them off the road, on the road. And you see that transformation now in Toronto, where everybody has a bike, and we now reorganize the city around bikes because of this massive transformation. In the way, by the way, that company and the companies around it produced billions of dollars of jobs and profits for a Taiwanese community in a town you probably never heard about.
But this does speak, I think, to the global fragmentation of production, which you think is a good thing, yes? Why is this a good thing?
I think it's a good thing because just think about the things we can now have. Just think about how, when it works, and we need to make sure it works because currently it does not work, and the path we're moving through it, as you can see, because of supply chain disruption, is not a good one. We need to make it much more resilient. You can move innovation in a much faster rate. You can create jobs, which we have for millions of people. While we are sort of kvetching and feeling sorry for ourselves in Canada, you have to remember that in the last 2 generations, more people went out from abject poverty in the globe than ever before. And I think that as a humanity, we have to be proud at what we achieve. The problem is that right now it's completely out of kilt. And people in Canada and elsewhere are suffering. And we need to refigure, and especially for Canada, and especially for cities, different cities in Canada need to do it differently, where we are in this global production networks. How do we want to see them? How do we want to engage with them? And how we create innovational capacities and capabilities that allow us to excel long term, so our children's life will be better than ours.
Let me throw two words your way, and these words get used interchangeably quite a bit, but I know you believe that they mean different things. Invention and innovation. What's the distinction?
So invention, which is not innovation, is if you and I would be back in my university in a lab, and we'll think up of a new idea, be it a software, be it a new design for semiconductors, be it maybe a new mRNA molecular for a vaccine for a disease we haven't yet heard of. That's invention. Even if we move it to the prototype, sort of shows that it can work, it is still invention. Innovation happens when you take those ideas and actualize them in the reality. So from point of view of economy and production and services, all the way through, right? From the first innovation to making it much better, to making it much more reliable, second generation innovation, innovation of how to produce this stuff, and then innovation how to distribute it, and innovation then after how to do after sale. And you can see it in multiple industries. I already talked about the mRNA vaccines, right? And how we now need to do that if we actually want to, I don't know if to conquer, but at least control COVID. But you can see it in the things that you use. You have a smartphone that a few years ago was a supercomputer, and it is changed drastically every 6 months. You would look at how that smartphone is being produced. You will see how in places like Tel Aviv and Silicon Valley, it's novel product innovation. It's those ideas that I talked about them and first time to the market. But if you actually want to make them into a real thing, you have to go to Taiwan. If you want memory chips or controller for your screens, you have to go to Korea. And then the only place that actually figure out how to take all those tens of thousands of components and make a smartphone that you would actually like to buy, you go to Shenzhen.
In which case, which is a bigger scandal in Canada? Are problems associated with invention or with innovation?
With innovation, very clearly. So I'm sad to say to all my friends in the business sector, but this is not a failure of a government and not a failure of Canadian and not a failure of our research infrastructure. In the last 45 years, Canada has become the most educated country in the world. Our research infrastructure is excellent, bar none. And at the same time, the business sector has invested less and less and less in R&D and innovation, even in the buying of new technologies. Instead, we take really highly qualified, highly skilled Canadian, pay them wages that are lower than what they should be. And you can see it in the median wages in Canada being stuck for 45 years, Steve. That's 2 generations. And use the businessmen, use our education, publicly paid for, to compensate for the fact that they do not buy new technologies and, God forbid, even talk about doing R&D. And that's why we are failing in innovation and innovation policy. That realization that the failure is in the business sector, in the big companies, small companies, medium-sized companies, apart from the startup sector, has not really reached policymakers, and we need to do something about it, and we need to tilt our whole innovation systems in order to solve that if we want all that investment in Canadian, in human capital and education and research to happen in Canada. Otherwise, we'll continue to see Canadian invention becoming a lot of money for American and Chinese companies.
Dan, I want to circle back with you right now, because I think one of the first things you said when I asked you about innovation needing to happen in real places, and you said, like Hamilton and Regina. And Hamilton's in Ontario, so I want to ask you about Hamilton. Not just because it's my hometown, but I'm interested. The most important task for a region to have is a vision. That's what you've said. So let me ask you about Hamilton. Does Hamilton, in your judgment, have a vision?
So actually, Hamilton reached the vision. Yes. I fear for Hamilton as I fear that they lose this vision. But let me explain what the vision. So when I walk around the world and in Canada to a lot of places, and they said, we really want to have innovation. And I say, okay, so let's assume you're successful in innovation. What will happen? And they start telling me, oh, there'll be a lot more VC money, a lot more patent, a lot more startup. And I say, no, but that's not what I'm talking about. I want a really pragmatic vision. How do you want your economy, your city, to look like in 10 to 15 years? So assume you're the most successful in your policies. What kind of companies you have, what kind of people they employ, how they make money. And then let's do reverse engineering and get there. Hamilton, by way of error and trial, actually had a special vision. I think the best way to look at it is to look at McMaster universities and look at their innovation in the education of medicine. I don't know if you know, I think you should, as a Hamiltonian or born in Hamilton. Hamilton and McMaster completely transformed the way we teach medicine. Completely transformed we practice medicine. Medicine by evidence, by the way, is from your hometown. And then if you look at the companies coming out of this, they are all built on that idea that what's called population science, right? That you look at the clients and you figure out how to do things. You create platforms for medicine to reach, for example, vector for cancer instead of the one molecular, which is the Silicon Valley way. So there is a vision. The problem is Hamilton is now becoming really successful. And when a place becomes really successful now, the venture capital and all the rest come circling in. And very quickly, you're being transformed to something that looks like Tel Aviv, which is really successful, but unbelievably unequal. And more of your society is not part of that miracle.
Let's, in our remaining moments here, you have a very funny quote here that I want to put to you. You call Canada, quote, a tragic, morbidly fascinating innovation paradox. How come?
As we have been talking. So you look at Canada, and you look especially at Canadian, okay? And not us old farts, but especially younger Canadian. They are the most educated people in the world, the most highly skilled people in the world, the most diverse and capable and creative. That's on one side. You look at our on universities and public research infrastructure, and every measure you ever want to try, inputs and outputs, it is doing whatever we want it to do, actually punching way above its weight. And then you actually look at how this transformed to business, commercialization, products, all across the production network, right? Not just new products and cool companies, but all across. And it's a disaster. It's such a disaster that you look at always OECD countries for the last 20 years, their GDP to R&D to GDP ratio. So how much they innovate goes like this. You look at Canada and it's this. The only rich, wealthy, educated country in the world going down for 20 years. And let me repeat it, the only. At the same time, we're so successful elsewhere. If that's not a failure, if that's not a description of how things don't work, we put more money in to get less from the private sector. I don't know what failure is, and I don't know how this is not a dereliction of duty on the part of a private business or private sector in Canada.
And yet...
And I understand why we do it, by the way. Their profits are immense. They're very profitable. If I was an investor, I would invest in Canadian businesses. As a Canadian, I'm very, very worried on the business model.
Well, and I was going to say, and yet you call yourself a hopeful cynic in the book. I get why you're cynical. We've talked about it for the last 20 minutes. What makes you hopeful?
Hopeful is exactly innovation. Innovation is the ability of humans to put ideas into reality. And if we don't like the reality, we innovate, we change it. sometimes for worse, climate change. But I think if you look for all of our history, and if you truly believe, which I believe, in the good part of humanity, I think that overall we are changing and can change things for the better. And I have a lot of hopes in Canadian, this highly educated, really good Canadian, good nature and good skills. But once they realize the failure of our private sector, and by the way, once business leaders realize it, we can change our way and actually reach a much, much happier outcome.
Dan, that's our time, so I have two things left to do. Number one, congratulate you again on your Writers' Trust Balsillie Prize for Public Policy nomination. I believe they're going to make that announcement in a couple of days, so we'll cross our fingers for you if that's allowed. There you go. And remind everybody that your book is called Innovation in Real Places, like Hamilton, like Regina, Strategies for Prosperity in an Unforgiving World, and we're glad it has brought Dan Breznitz to our studio, virtually at least, tonight. Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you so much, Steve. Hope to see you again soon.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.